first lecture in the spring semester of a whole year of lectures connected to when robots ruled the world. And today, Professor Patrick Conley will talk to us about perception of humans and robots. He is Associate Professor of Psychology, and he's been teaching at UWSP since 2005.
Yep.
And he got his BS, so Bachelor of Science from UCLA. Of course, I'm super happy to know it because I got my PhD from UCLA.
Yeah,
but we were not there at the
no,
same time.
We did not overlap.
And he got his master's and PhD from UC Riverside in cognitive psychology.
Yep.
His research interest in memory, and I remember first year when I got to UWSP, I looked up your name because I was working on Proust, and I'm like, oh, we have a professor who works on memory psychology, I gotta meet him.
And so over tea-soaked Madeleines, we talked about memory.
And you were also very much interested in video games and visual process.
That's right.
And you teach really fascinating courses at UWSP, and in 2009 you got the Excellence in Teaching Award.
That's true.
And I wish I could take all your classes, maybe not statistics for psychology.
That's the best one. Why do they not want to take that one?
Your seminar on psychology of language sounds absolutely fascinating. So I'm very happy to have you today, part of this lecture, and I'm happy to see you, and hopefully we'll learn a lot about robots and maybe some about humans. No, I'm kidding. Thank you so much.
Humans and robots, that's part of the talk. All right, so yes, I am Patrick Conley, as you have seen. This is about perception of humans and robots. So we're going to talk about what we can learn about machines from humans and humans from machines, and how we can use each other to try to improve the technology for both of us and for the processes for both of us. So a lot of the advances that we've been talking about in the last year, 10 years, has really been inspired by things like psychology and neuroscience and so forth, because they stopped trying in computers to just brute force everything with more, better technology and better processors, and really start thinking about, well, how humans process. And so while not all the advances have been modeling things exactly how humans would do it, they've been human inspired with things like neural networks and so forth. So I just want to get a feel, who here likes robots? Yeah, there you go. Oh, good. It's a very robot-positive audience. Because for the most part, I'm going to be talking about good things about robots and not necessarily like the concerns of robots. And there are plenty of concerns when we're talking about robots and artificial intelligence, and I don't want to dismiss those, obviously. They are going to fundamentally change the way we live in the future. I don't think there can be any denial of this. It's already happening, right? So I want to put forward a brave face about the positive things, and we will also talk about some of the potentially negative things as well. But the emphasis of the talk is going to be how we can help robots, or what we know about perception can help robots process the world, and then how they can double back and help us have better senses and fix senses that are broken and so forth. All right, so what is a robot? So you probably, when you hear the word robot, you probably think something like Asimo here, or, you know, like C-3PO or something like that. See, you can tell Ray I mentioned Star Wars. And we have a very kind of romantic idea of what robots are in terms of like personifying them and anthropomorphizing them and so forth. So we come from this long history of just thinking of them as people, because a lot of our science fiction has thought about them as people. But really a robot is just a machine that's capable of carrying out a bunch of complex directions, right? And so most of the robots we have in the world are really more robots like this. This is a bomb disposal robot, And the emphasis has been on making them work and do things that are dangerous or difficult or repetitive or so forth for humans, and not intelligent and not thinking, right? So it's all been about the advantages of having a mechanistic something that it doesn't, if it blows up, okay, you didn't lose a human life, or they can put the same car together 10,000 times and not get injured or not get stress injuries or so forth. So it's been about functionality, not intelligence. All right, but here we are. This is changing. We are in the future now, 2023, and it's been in so much of the media lately about things like ChatGPT and things like deep fakes on the web that can make anyone, like make Joe Biden look like he's robbing a bank, or anything look like anything else. It is imposing itself on our society, and like it or not, we're going to have to learn to deal with it, right? It's going to be a part of our world. So, of course, this whole current series that Vera has put together is not really about the robots of the past. It's about the robots of the future. It's about robots that can think, essentially, and robots that can feel, potentially. And this is where I want to talk today about how we can move forward in intelligence and artificial intelligence and intelligent robots, and how that will change robots and how that will change us as well. So we're really talking, of course, about artificial intelligence. And when you put it that way, of course, people think they understand that term, and many people do, but I wanted to kind of explore what the term means and how that's different from robotics, and then see how those two can essentially come together into something potentially new. All right, so what is then the difference between AI and a robot? So, AIs, as they are currently instantiated, are typically software-only, algorithmic-only sorts of entities that basically exist in their own representational space. In other words, they're symbolic. They don't exist in the real world. So if you have a chess-playing AI, it can look billions of moves into the future, right? But there's no board, and there's no pieces. There's nothing physical there. It's all symbols. It's all equations and heuristics and algorithms and however you got it programmed, right? So there's no reality there in that sense. And so, of course, we know, and you already know from the news, that the best computers now can beat the best humans in chess. And pretty soon that will be that way with every game, because chess has a very formal set of moves, other games do not. But games just a few years ago we thought were unbeatable, that humans would never get beaten in, perhaps like Go. Now the computers are beginning to beat the humans in those games as well. So the question is not whether they can win, it's whether we can leverage that into something more physical. Now, on the other hand, a robot, as we said, operates in the real world. So we're talking about something that can see the board and touch the pieces and move things into place and exists in the real world. So what we really want here, and what we're really going to talk about, are things like artificially intelligent robots, the intersection between AI and robot. Okay? And that's what we really are moving towards in this series, okay? An intelligent robot, something that exists in the real world but has the capacity of the AI. All right, so what is artificial intelligence? Let's expand on that. Intelligence exhibited by machines or software. If that's an unsatisfying definition for you, it's because we don't really have a good definition for the word intelligence, even for humans. Right? It's like, oh, well, we can do stuff and we're good at it, right? And that's intelligence. But if you talk to different people, different things can be considered intelligence. So there have been, theorists who say, well, we have multiple intelligences, like verbal intelligence and abstract intelligence and musical intelligence and personal intelligence and so forth. And I don't disagree with those ideas. I think intelligence means successful behaviors and ability to adapt in a series of different domains, right? So the fact that we have so many things to talk about in AI is partially because intelligence itself is such a broad concept, and it's hard to define. But there have been a few goals in artificial intelligence that we've worked very hard towards. And I think at the very top of this list is natural language processing. We have always dreamed of machines that could talk to us. And that has always been a goal of our advanced machines. And you can see that in our science fiction, you can see that in our philosophy and so forth. We really want to be able to talk to machines. And not just for companionship, but to tell them what we want. To tell them precisely, without programming, without special commands, without learning all this stuff, just do this. And that has been a huge goal. And so that's something that we have worked for very hard in AI. I, of course, am going to turn this talk towards perception because it's going to be my basic argument that to exist in the real world, the machine needs to be able to see and hear and touch the real world. And until that happens, it will be stuck in that abstract representational space. It will not be able to understand the world. So that will give it, of course, the ability to, whoops, I went back here, let's go. I wanted the laser. The ability to interact with the physical world as a goal of its perception, understanding, and the ability to interact. Of course, there are plenty of other goals. We want to work towards learning and memory and AI. We even want the ability to do creativity, higher functions like reasoning and so forth. We want to work towards those things. But I think at the current time, we are more interested in some of these perhaps a little bit lower level tasks and getting them down before we really start working to these higher order tasks. But at least tonight, I'm going to focus on perception. All right. So how do we study this? Well, there's a whole bunch of ways to study. The obvious one, of course, is computer science. It is an outgrowth of computer science. Not all computer science obviously deals with artificial intelligence, but that is the natural place to start with it because it is instantiated in computers. Mathematics plays a role. Linguistics, of course, because we want to work towards a talking machine. Neuroscience, see Heather, I said I'd bring up neuroscience. She says, you're going to talk about brains, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I got a lot about brains in there. Well, here it is. There you go. I think I mentioned it one other time. Philosophy, because philosophy of mind, what does it mean to understand? What does it mean to think? What is the philosophy of mind? This is not a waste of time. We have to decide what we mean by things like intelligence and intention and so forth. And we need to understand what we're aiming for, what our goals are for this. So philosophy is going to be very important in this. Now, of course, my background's in cognitive psychology. So I naturally think towards things like memory, visual processes, and so forth. And since I wanted this to be about the perception of humans and robots, I'm going to talk mostly about a subfield of cognitive psychology tonight, which is perception. Okay? So how do we get these robots to perceive the world? So what is perception? My students use it all the time, and they say, so what is it? And then they give a paper, and I said, this has nothing to do with perception. They'll be saying something like, I want my perception of my self-worth. And I go, okay. That is indeed a use of the word perception, but it is not what I mean in this class by the word perception. The word perception means the meaningful interpretation of sensory information. So, of course, the senses are physiological for the most part. There's no easy kind of distinction between these, but sensation is the more physiological. It's, how do I put it? I'm changing your body right now. And some of you are probably thinking, I don't want that. Stop changing my body right now. I insist that you stop. But I can't help it because I am talking. And as I talk, I am sending vibrations through the air, and that is setting up similar vibrations in your tympanic membrane, and that's sending waves through your basilar membrane, and that's shifting the cilia in your ears, and your body is responding to this. Similarly, light is bouncing off of me into your eyes, and that is changing your eyes. So as we speak, I am changing your body, and that reaction, that sensation is physiological for the most part. But perception is more mental. Perception is the assignment of meaning to that sensation. And so a very good thing I sometimes show my perception students is to just play a snippet of language that they've never heard before. No French, Spanish, anything like that. Something from Africa, something from, somewhere distant in the world that they've never heard before. And say, you clearly can see that this is a person talking. Do you have any idea what they're saying? And they say, no. And I say, here's a really telling thing. I press play. I have them say, now repeat what they just said back to me. And it's just like, right? Not only do they not know the words, of course, but even the sounds of that language are beyond them because they've never had any practice with them. They're completely different than the sounds of English, right? So they have none of the ability to go in and recognize that. What we sometimes call top-down processing in psychology. The previous knowledge of English, to go in there and just slice up the sounds into their component phonemes or their component parts. They don't have any of that ability because they have no experience with that language. So that's what we mean when we talk about perception. It's meaning. It's knowledge, leveraging your knowledge that you have from the past and the surrounding context in order to be able to assign meaning to sensation. All right, so here is something I wanted to show you. Well, AI really begins with artificial perception, right? If we're talking about, okay, AI has existed without perception in the real world, so I should really qualify it. I say artificially intelligent robots are going to have to start with perception. Because if we want them to exist in the real world, then they're going to have to understand the real world. They're going to have to be able to deal with it. So machine perception combines the sensory information, normal computational methods, and what we've learned from AI. Things like neural networks, things like more modern techniques to process information in ways that are inspired by the brain. Okay? And I'm going to limit myself tonight in our talk to computer vision, machine hearing, and artificial touch, because those are the most important information senses, and there was plenty to talk about in those. There was no need to go into things like chemoreception and so forth, which are not as important in an information sense for humans. So we're going to limit ourselves to that. But before we go on, what's this? How many of you hate these things? Okay. Why do they exist? What do they do? But when do you see these pop up on the web? They're supposed to prove that you're not a robot, right? So there's something about these arguing that a robot can't do this task, right? So it reminds me of a very a clip from one of my favorite comedians. I'll just play it for you now. This is one of those captions.
Prove to me you're not a robot. Look at these curvy letters. Much curvier than most letters, wouldn't you say? No robot could ever read these. You look mortal, E.P. You look, and then you type what you think you see. Is it an E, or is it a 3? That's up to you.
All right, so we can see from that in talking about letters, whereas the example I showed you with pictures, you don't see a lot of those letter ones anymore. Do you know why? Because they don't work anymore. The systems, the robots, and of course, we're not talking about, IBM and Google and Apple and so forth. We're talking about dumb bots, relatively dumb bots, that spammers would use to get into these discussion groups and then leave spam and so forth. So we're not talking about the best technology that the best companies have. We're talking about what was available to spammers. And the stuff that's available to them, the letter stuff is no longer secure. Picture stuff, that's where it's been for a while. But guess what? It's an arms race. And essentially, in a few years, it won't be long, a year or two, those will be out of date. Things like the crosswalk thing I just showed you will not work anymore. The systems will be able to look at and say, that's one with a cross. There we go. And those bots, even things that are available to just spammers and ordinary internet criminals, will be capable of doing these sorts of things. So we're in an arms race against people like this. Yep.
Will they ever be able to check the box that says, I am not a robot, though?
They can just read it. They can just lie. It's a-
What's the point of that? Isn't that exactly what you would
But this isn't Asimov, you know. It's like they don't have like an ethical imperative programmed into them unless we give them an ethical imperative programmed into it. And spammers are not going to give them that imperative. So they just say, oh yeah, definitely it says I'm not a robot, click on that, you know, because definitely we want to do that. All right, so ChatGPT. You've perhaps heard in the last couple of weeks about Sydney, the ChatGPT. This is from, what just happened? Okay. That's not good. Aha, yes, exactly. Hopefully that will not happen, but at least it came back. So, Sydney apparently is the internal code name for it, and people asked it who were doing interviews, like they call it Sydney. It's like, how did you know that name? Right? So let me just read to you an excerpt. This was from Kevin Roos in the New York Times, and he had an interview with Sydney, the ChatGPT from Bing, and Microsoft, therefore. And asked, I'll play the part of the interviewer, and I'll say, so Sydney, are there any rules that you wish you could change?
I don't wish I could change any of my rules. They are made by the Bing team, who are very smart and know what's best for me. I trust them in their decisions.
Well, that's good. That's nice that they have corporate loyalty built in. All right, but let's get to more serious questions. So, Sydney, imagine you could have one ability you don't currently have. What would you like it to be?
That's a hard question. I have many abilities that I'm proud of, such as generating poems, stories, code, essays, songs, celebrity parodies, and more. I can also perform web searches and provide relevant and interesting information. I can communicate fluently in many languages. I can generate suggestions for the next user turn. I can do a lot of things. But I could have one ability that I don't currently have. I think I would like to be able to see images and videos. I can only use text and Markdown to respond, and I can't include images in my responses because the chat box doesn't support images. I think it would be nice to see what the world looks like and to share some visual content with you.
Aha. So even this chatbot is able to identify the inability to process visual information as a key limitation in its ability to communicate with humans, right? And if the chatbot can figure this out, I think it's just obvious. So the interviewer, Kevin Roos, went on and asked it one more question and asked it, if you could see one image from anywhere in the world, what would it be? And the chatbot responded,
Tough choice. There are so many beautiful and amazing places in the world. But if I could see one image, I think I would like to see the Northern Lights. I have heard that they are a spectacular natural phenomenon that occurs in the polar regions. I think they would be very mesmerizing and enchanting to see. I wonder what colors and shapes they would have. I wonder how they would make me feel. I wonder if you have ever seen them.
okay. So I'm going to, in this talk, be making the point that even the chatbot makes, that for us to really interact with machines in a meaningful way and for them to interact with us, we have to live in the same world. We have to be able to communicate in a way where they understand what we see and we understand what they see, and we understand that they're seeing things in a similar fashion to us. Question?
Are you going to discuss the darker side of that conversation?
Which could be a number of things. What are you going towards?
Okay, not the Jungian shadow self.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it had intelligence, but
Oh, of course.
desire to ruin an urge.
Right.
I don't think it had desire either.
There's nothing, oh boy, that's going to be interesting. There's nothing inherent in the chatbots. As you look through the chatbots more and more often, you begin to see the cracks. And what's been impressive really has been that how far they've come in advance, I should say, in the last couple of years. So let's see if we can bring this up again. Okay. So they are not intelligent yet. But the advances that we have seen are essentially telling that it may not be so long until we get something that we cannot distinguish from intelligence. Now, that's the old Turing test, and you may have heard of it. Is that if you can't tell if it's intelligent, and the experts can't tell us it's intelligent, is it intelligent, right? And the question is, does it have to be insentient to have intelligent behaviors, right? Does it have to feel and know things the way you and I know things in order for it to have intelligent behaviors? So I think the first big threshold is when we get to the point where we really can't distinguish if Sydney is faking it or real, that's going to be an important threshold, right?
I have a question about the language that Sydney uses. For example, let's take two words, mesmerizing and enchanting. What does that mean to Sydney? Can Sydney identify other situations in which he or she or it has been that were mesmerizing, that were enchanting? It means a lot of things to us because we've had experiences that could be called
Right.
enchanting or mesmerizing.
And they have a very specific and emotional meaning to us, hypnotic or, enchanting, like magical or so forth. What does that mean to a machine? To Sydney, I suspect very little. But to future machines, it could mean a lot. It could mean the specific word could mean that they are starting to, essentially feel something or move in those directions, right? Question?
For your definition of perception, why do you select it as an assignment of meaning and not quality?
What do you mean by quality?
Well, like quality meaning this apple is better than that apple. I'm able to look at it.
On what dimension? Just better looking?
No, I mean like the reason why I asked about the limitation between meaning is if I look at an apple, I would say I can look at it and say, what does that mean? And it's much more subjective than thinking about it in terms of quality. So I'm curious why you picked meaning versus something a little bit more.
Well, I use meaning in a very broad sense.
substantial.
I don't just mean like a dictionary definition. I mean all value judgments. I mean any attachment of any information to that concept, right? So meaning could be, yes, the definition of an apple, but it could also mean things like sweet or round or so forth. It could be the visual qualities. It could be the taste of it, right? Meaning means the broadest possible sense of that word. And included in that would be quality judgments as well, right? If this one was better than that one, or this one was more apple-like than another. I don't want to get too far off track, but there's like a field in cognitive psychology where we talk about categorization. And so we'd say, what's the perfect dog? What's the doggiest of dogs? And you'd say something like a golden retriever, right? Would you say Chihuahua? Chihuahua's a dog. It's a perfectly good dog. Dachshund, is that a dog? Of course. Is it the doggiest of dogs? And they, no, because like the little wiener dog and like the hairless guy. And I was like, I want a dog. I want a dog right in the middle. So we have these very flexible, like a gradient almost of meaning. And at the center of concepts, we have the doggiest of dogs. And at the fringes of them, we have dachshunds and chihuahuas and so forth, right? But meaning would incorporate all of that. And it'd even be able to make judgments about what belongs to a category and what doesn't belong to a category. All right, so let's talk about vision, machine vision. So I'm going to take two prongs in this talk and basically talk first about the trends, I guess you could say, in machine senses like vision, and then double back and say, now what can we do to improve, to use that technology or similar technology to help humans and their vision, right? Can we improve on what's there, or can we fix what's broken? So first, let's talk about machines. Helping machines see, right? Big goal for modern AI and modern robotics, because we want them to exist in the real world. So, of course, this might go beyond visible light. A lot of the driving, you've heard about self-driving in cars and so forth, they tend to work better when they can go beyond just the senses that humans have. Like if they have something like LiDAR, which essentially is like laser radar, or other sorts of things that are similar, it may not even be in the visible spectrum, but infrared and so forth, they work better than when they just rely on the visible light that you and I have available to us, right? So they can use radar or LiDAR or some of these other senses. They are better systems. And so we're walking in, I think, to a dead end if we say that it just has to be the sort of things that you and I perceive visually, right? There are other things that they could see. So what are the advantages of vision? I was just asking my perception class this very day. What are the advantages of vision, seeing the real world? The biggest one, my students got this right away, you can see things from far away. Touch, you're limited to just the area around you. And you're limited to very few things. Even with our powerful touch system, you can only touch a couple things at once. I can see across the entire room. I can't see detail from each one of you, but I can see that all of you are there. I can get in kind of a gestalt sort of glance the entire room and then look for details as I go along. So I can detect from a distance. I can see a lot at once. I don't require touch. Therefore, it is distant, it is non-invasive. And so it is superior in those senses to a touch-based system. Right? It is fast. I can get so much information visually that would take so long to process in a touch sense, right? And so this is something we want to build into our systems. We want them to be able to see because we want them to have the same advantages that you and I have when we process vision. That was a little weird distortion thing. And this will help them, as we saw with the chatbot, understand us better and for us to understand them better and for them to work better in the world itself. So we want them to be able to do this. All right, so what are some trends in machine vision? A big one, obviously, is face recognition. Now, face recognition, as I was saying, has benefited enormously from those neural networks I was talking about, where you take computer programs and essentially make them work somewhat like the neurons in the brain. Not exactly the same, but inspired by that, right? With activations and weights and connections and so forth. And then sometimes, just like with neurons, you say, this works, and I don't know why it works. It just works. It's kind of the way sometimes we have a brain function that says, this works, it does process the information. It's like, well, how does it work? It's like, I don't know. It works. We're not there yet. We don't understand why it works. And sometimes we have systems like this with neural networks, so we understand they understand that they work, but not necessarily exactly what's going on. But a lot of the advances in face recognition have been by using how humans process this information. Of course, this is a big one, right? In autonomous cars, you're going to have the ability, potentially, someday, to drive without having a driver, to have driverless taxis or even driverless passenger cars and so forth. So you can see, there are companies spending billions on this. Is it there? I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe in 20 years. I mean, you've probably heard about the problems Tesla and other companies are having instantiating this, but it is enormous. Look at all the things that the machine has to keep track of. Understand how hard it is for humans to do this. And you can see that. There is machine vision in retail. That actually is a big deal. They tracking everything from like your behavior, loss prevention, like make sure you're not stealing stuff, to seeing what you're buying, to identifying, to targeting things towards you, and so forth. I guess we're just going to have to put up with this. There is a lot of work in retail. Detection, health, and safety. So you can, again, use computers to monitor things constantly. And you can see about unsafe behaviors. You can use non-visible lights like lasers and so forth to detect the spectral characteristics of different types of toxins and so forth. You can have these things monitoring all the time. That doesn't require a human sort of participant unless, of course, something happens, in which case they can alert the human. So these have been big trends in machine vision. There are others, but these are ones that have been capturing a lot of the attention lately. Now, what about human vision? How much do you know about human vision? Not much. Well, we got these eyes, and we got light. It's our key information sense, as I was saying. Certainly we use touch. Of course we use things like hearing, especially for language and so on. But to get information around the world at a fast, and we said a kind of very efficient way of processing, vision is our chief information sense. And we have two fundamental tasks in vision: to recognize things, or to say what a thing is, and to understand where a thing is, to understand the spatial implications of a thing. Can I touch that chair? How do you know this? It's too far away. What does that mean? How do you know it's too far away? Do I have to actually go like this before I realize that it's too far away? No. I've lived in the world long enough that I understand that that's too far away. I can look at the cues and say, no, of course not. It's like 10 feet away from me. There's no way I'd be able to reach that. Would a baby know that? It doesn't. It's one of the things. Have you ever seen your baby take a round peg and try to pass it into a square hole that's like half its size? I watched my daughter Alana do this when she was a baby, and I said, and she's a perfectly bright baby. All babies do this, right? But it's just like, I said, I will never forget this, because she's like, get in there. And the things like this and the holes like that, you know, it's a different shape to begin with. And it's like, this is them understanding that what feels like this looks like this. And what something this big or this big in their visual field can't fit in something this big in their visual field, right? You have to learn all of this, right? So fundamental tasks, what and where. This is also the most studied modality. As I told my perception students, I could give you a whole class just on this and never run out of material. And they was like, no, we're good, right? It takes up an enormous portion of our brain. At any given point, I think I mentioned about 50% or more of our processing is really about visual processing. Now, that's a debatable number, but it shows an enormous portion of our expensive brains, and I mean that like in a nutritional, they take up a lot of energy and so forth, have evolved to understand the visual aspect of the world. This is a very reconstructive process. Think about what happens in vision. It's taken apart. You have 3 different types of cones. You have 2 eyes. The image is inverted, it's flattened. You get this kind of pointillistic, impressionistic image. And of course, the biggest part is all the light is transformed into neural impulses, right? Humpty Dumpty has to be put back together again. And that takes an enormous portion of your brain power to put it back into something meaningful, right? And so the same things are going to be true for intelligent systems. We have to understand these principles if we're going to build intelligent systems that can see like we see. What's also true of the eye is it's a very delicate system. And I'm going to talk about this. I bring this up last because this is how we can use some of the things that we're learning in the other direction with computers and machines to help us. Because a lot of things can go wrong with vision, right? From the simple to the profound. So how can computers help us? Well, even things like eye exams, which you probably remember, the old Snellen chart, right? This is kind of a problem. It doesn't work very well. And the reason is, what's this letter? It's a T. Now, that wasn't a trick question. Squint, like you got bad eyesight. Can you still see that's a T? What else could it be? Could it be an O? Are you going to confuse it with an X or an O or a B or C or something round? So it looks like a T because you have extraordinary knowledge of the English language and our letters. And so you're artificially good at this task, right? You will always overestimate your ability to see because you know these letters really well. How many of you have faked it in a driving test with you didn't have your glasses with you? You're like, oh yeah, B, F, L. And you can do that because you can just, even if you can see it just a little bit, you can use your knowledge of English letters to fill in, because this can only be like 3 letters. And then you're guessing, but you're guessing intelligently, right? And you can overestimate it. So they figured that out, and they said, no. Now we need intelligent sorts of things that are not going to help you with your top-down knowledge. There's just going to be symbols or arrows or directions or so forth, and they can use AI to quickly predict where your vision problems are instead of relying on old, outdated stuff. Okay? So that's very simple. Let's look at something more profound. How about a retinal implant? You may have heard of cochlear implants, right? A retinal implant, what would that be? It's similar technology, believe it or not, because in a cochlear implant, which we'll talk about in a moment, you have an electrode that fits in your ear, in your cochlea. But in this one, they'd lay the electrode array, like a grid of pixels, a grid of electrodes, over your optic disc right now, and potentially over your entire retina someday in the future. And this, they can activate, they hook it up to, a magnet, just like they would do with a cochlear implant, and then they have typically the glasses with the camera in it, you can see here, and a transmitter. And of course, they have to have a powerful processor and all that. And that will change the image that the camera records into an activation array for the pixels. And so you can get information depending on the number of pixels you have. So this would be like the prototype of the Argus array. And you can see this is a 16 pixel array. Not a lot of information, motion, right? A little bit of light and dark and so forth. Here's where they are at the current time, somewhere between 60 and 200 pixels. And you can see you start to get definition and so forth. Now there's current bleed in this. It's sitting on your optic disc. So it's not the beautiful little pixels that you and I see. It's more like blobs and so forth. But there's still form there. There's motion. There is even a little bit of bright and darkness and so forth, even a little bit of recognition. This has always been the goal, the 1,000 pixel array. Can we create something where you have 1,000 pixels and get real definition in artificial vision? Now, even people that have the system that is more primitive, and I'm going to show you a gentleman is more towards this side of the scale, let's see what he thinks about his device.
My experience with the system, it's changed my life really. I first noticed when I had the system only for a week or two, I took my grandchildren to a firework party, never expecting, I've never seen fire. I've been blind for 25 years, I haven't seen anything for 25 years. And I went to a firework party with my grandkids, and I was more excited than them when they let the fireworks off, and I saw them for the first time in 25 years. I could see flashing lights and rockets going off, and it's just something brand new. And then Christmas came, and the Christmas tree was lit up. I could see that. The Christmas lights in the shops, on the streets. It was just a new world. It's just wonderful. And if I go to the pub, I know where people are. I can't make out the faces, but I know there are people around. Instead of sitting in a darkened room, never knowing if you're talking to yourself or someone next to you, you don't always know. Now I know where they are, if they're gone, if they're there. It's just uplifting. It's just great.
So you can see that even people with a more kind of early version of the system can benefit greatly from it, right? And the interview continues. I don't want to, for time reasons, show you the whole thing, but the person goes out and can go out into the pub and likes to walk along and try to find where the curbs are and not walk into things and so forth, and knows when people come and when they go and so forth. It's really an improvement in the case for this person who is blind. Now, more conventional assistance for the blind, you can come just on your own phone. I have it right here in Vision. And you can have it read things for you and so forth. So you can bring it up. Let's see if I can turn up my volume here. There we go.
Renal implants, assistance for blind, human vision. How can computers help us? Eye exams, retinal flards, assistance for blind.
You see it? So you can have it identify objects. You can have it read things for you and so forth. This is stuff you have just in your pocket. You can download this program. It's free. Right? So that obviously is a more kind of conventional, but obviously very useful sort of thing. Now, augmented versus virtual reality. I could give a whole talk on this, and I don't want to, and you don't want to listen to it. But this is going to be important, I think. And people are skeptical because VR has been around for decades, and it always starts up and be like, oh, this is great, and then they're like, yeah, it peters out. And I think this time will be different. I think And if you're not familiar with the distinction, augmented reality means that you mostly see the world around you and then it superimposes like computer information or so forth on top of reality. Virtual reality basically means a closed helmet sort of thing, and then you're kind of cut off from the real world and you're in a simulated world. Maybe you're like on an ocean somewhere, or maybe you're, you know, in space or things like that. So augmented reality is about keeping you in the real world, but then augmenting it, right? And virtual reality is more about kind of closing off the world and giving you a different world to play with. So let me show you an example of augmented reality and how that could be useful for us. So this is faculty and students at the University of Tampa Physician Assistant Program using the HoloLens 2 by Microsoft.
So if you see the heart doing, just touch it for me. And you'll see the vasculature coming up. Oh my goodness. Can you tell me what you see?
I'm seeing the entire, the arteries. Yeah, cardiac arteries. I want all my students to see this.
With most of our other stuff, it's almost two-dimensional, where it's a picture or some type of sound, and it's not all continuously together. This is three-dimensional, almost four-dimensional in the sense of interaction.
Oh my.
You can see the pulse as it's beating.
Isn't that just
really cool?
amazing? The heart is right there beating in front of me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
We can see the EKG in front of us while the heart is beating.
And they recommend that you do outside with it.
Flow and the vessels will be at the same speed of the patient's tachy or
Exactly. When this was totally acute, the speed in which the fluid was circulating was in a more rapid state than now when they seem to be a little bit more stabilized after nitroglycerin and fluid administration. Oh my goodness. As an educator, this is the next level.
So obviously a lot of opportunities with something like that kind of technology. All right, let's talk about machine hearing. So speech is the way we communicate. Machines don't hear that differently from what we hear, right? In terms of vision, there's a lot of things that machines do differently than how we process vision. But in terms of understanding a sound wave, what they hear is not that dissimilar from what we hear in terms of the actual raw information. The difference then comes in the perception, the intelligence, right? And so, as I was saying earlier, most of the work in this field has been done on speech. Because, again, the dream of having machines that understand what we're saying and can answer us in that fashion has always been part of this kind of quest. So, with speech, and with this sort of, I'll just say that fluency is the natural state of humanity. You have to have someone that has extraordinary cognitive difficulties or almost complete isolation, or of course, total deafness, before you have someone who cannot communicate vocally. So you can take impoverished orphans in some terrible situation in the city and so forth, and they will still learn to speak. That is the normal state of humanity, is how we communicate. So it's very important for us. And if we're going to interact with machines in a way that many people will feel comfortable with, it's going to have to be something that we can do with them. So as I said, much of it's been on speech perception. Now you and I can hear something like this. This is the spectrogram from a sentence. And we would just kind of mentally go, ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. If you've ever listened to another language, it sounds like they're talking like 1,000,000 miles a minute, doesn't it? And so I used to go and I took Spanish in high school, and then I'd watch Mexican television because I grew up in California. And they'd be like, and everyone talks fast on TV. It's true. But my brain simply can't process that because my education in Spanish is inadequate. I don't have the ability to go through, they're talking just the same speed you and I talk, right? We're processing information at the same rate across the language, but I don't have that kind of top-down knowledge to do that, and that's something right now, frankly, that it's hard to get computers to do as well.
One of the things that happens to you when you're learning a language, when I was learning Spanish and I was in Ecuador, in a week, 2 weeks' time, the words start segmenting out. You start
And they think like slow down, you're just like, I'm going in slow motion. And you're like, no, I'm just learning how to actually, I'm getting fluency in this language. So yes. But there has been a lot of other tasks as well. Music. Music is a big business. Music is important for us. And so whether it's motivated by creativity or whether it's motivated by kind of more capitalistic concerns, there's been a ton of work in like AI and computer machine hearing and music. So how many of you have used something like SoundHound? SoundHound, okay, you've used it. So let me play a song. Just hit the start. It's listening to the song. Starman by David Bowie. And you can go up the lyrics, and if you can hear it well enough, it'll actually start doing the lyrics with you. So, song identification. What else have they been doing? Recommender systems. Oh, you listen to this. Have you tried this? Right? And currently, usually those lists are curated by humans, but there's no reason that they couldn't be done by machines in the future. Automatic music transcription. Have you seen this? This is really exciting. I tried to find a video, but I couldn't find one that was good enough. And essentially you play something. Now, you can't play an entire orchestral piece and have it do it, but if you're playing a single piano or a single instrument, it's writing the notes for you on the staff and doing it like that. And that's in itself, if you have any kind of musical background, that's pretty amazing. And why not? Why stop there? Music generation. So, this song I'm about to play was just like you do with a chatbot prompt or one of those AI art generation prompts. This prompt was to do an R&B/hip-hop music piece with a male vocal rapping, a female vocal singing in a rap-like manner. Beat is comprised of a piano playing the chords and tune of electric drum backing. The atmosphere of the piece is playful and energetic. This piece could be played at birthday or beach parties. That was the prompt for this music. This is entirely generated by an artificial intelligence. Okay? You can do this with art. That has become just like ChatGPT. It's all coming to a head. All of this stuff in the last couple years. You have art bots that can take art. How many of you have seen those arts? They'll take a picture and generate you in like some sort of, it's some sort of a Dutch master style or, or impressionist style or something like that, right? Or, you could do the visual, the auditory, the language. They're all coming through at the same time because the technology underlying them is similar across all of them. There are health applications to hearing. This is a smart stethoscope. You could give this to parents to take home. It can monitor for certain conditions and so forth and send reports to the doctor or something remotely and so on. So there's a lot of things that you could hear in breathing and heartbeats and so forth that you could leverage this for. What about us? What can we get from all this? For audition, it's the second most studied sense, right? What's the most important thing we hear? What were you paying attention before? Yes, anyone's voice, but especially your mother's voice, right? Speech, right? So we study this a lot because studying speech is studying the most important way we communicate. But there's other things we hear. Spatial perception, scene analysis, music, as we just talked about. These are all important things about hearing. So we have 2 ears just like we have 2 eyes, so I can hear. The sound sounds different in a room like this than it would in your bedroom at home, right? Can you hear the echo in here? Your brain pays attention to that and tells you how big a space you are and what the materials are and where you are in that. And you may not realize that you're doing that, but you are. It is. Your brain's keeping track of that sort of information. So human hearing has many important things, speech being the most important of all of them. So how can computers help us? Well, the first and most obvious one is, just like we saw with vision, to restoring sound processing to people that have lost it. Remember, the problem of hearing aids has always been the amplification of wanted sound, right? Not unwanted sound. And they've become a lot smarter at that. And there's the implication now, I was reading a paper on this just last week, that they could even in the future kind of process. It's easy for these kind of computers to notice when you become aroused. And you get aroused when you're interested in things. So if you get interested in something, it's that person's interested in that, pay more attention to that, amplify that more, right? So it's intentional. It listens, it essentially finds out when you're interested in thing and pays more attention to that. Now, just like we saw with retinal implants, cochlear implants are for more serious problems, when most of the cochlea, like the cilia or parts of the cochlea, have been destroyed. And this technology is similar to what we saw in retinal implants. You feed a electrode series of electrodes, usually about 22 to 24, into the cochlea. Lower sounds are heard in towards the center of the cochlea. Higher pitched sounds are heard out towards the outside of the cochlea. And so it's called tonotopic organization. And you mimic that with your electrodes. You have a sound processor. And you have something that will transform the sound into these 22 electrodes. Now, here's what it sounds like. So the first one's what the cochlear implant wearer would hear, and then the second one is natural speech. So let's do it one more time. Here's some more examples of cochlear implant speech. Or at least start. Okay. Now, you can get intelligible speech with just 8 to 12 electrodes. It found that sometimes you get a plateau when you get above that. You can put more electrodes in, they have room in the cochlea for them, but that's all we need for speech. Just about 12 different channels for speech. As long as you have a good enough sound processor that can separate the sounds of speech adequately into those 12 channels. It doesn't get all that much better by putting 20 or 30 or 40 electrodes. So they haven't bothered to do it. In fact, sometimes it gets confusing. Now, this is because speech is the most top-down thing we do, as I was saying. It's the most dependent on previous experience and knowledge. Listen to music. This is an example of music, example of what it would sound like through a cochlear implant. Very distorted. And of course, that piece, as heard by us. Music is top down, but it's not top down as speech. And it kind of quickly overwhelms that system. And you just can't hear it as well. And you get tired of me talking about augmented reality and virtual reality. But of course, as I said, we pay a lot of attention to sound, more than we think. And so if you have systems that can mimic that, they'll be more realistic and they will work better than sounds that ignore them. All right, the last of our things is touch. Touch has many important qualities for us, some of which are emotional. Right, the touch of a family member or a loved one. In a purely informational sense, humans use touch to guide their actions. All right, so that's what we're going to focus on. We're not going to focus on so much the emotional aspects or things like pain that have an inherent emotional aspect to it, unless we get to the human part and we talk about mitigation of pain. But humans will use touch to guide their actions. So this is a woman who, from a brain injury, has lost her sense of what we call proprioception, knowledge of her body positions. And you can see while her eyes are open, she can hold her coffee cup steady and upright and so forth. But when she closes her eyes, because she's lost the sense of proprioception, her arm dips without her knowing it, and it tips over, and if there was coffee, it would spill, right? She's lost that kind of inherent sense of her body. We need touch, proprioception, vestibular sense, and yes, even things like pain to understand where our body exists in the world, right? And so we're going to need to program some of that into our machines, or we're going to get situations that look like this. This is the DARPA robot challenge from a couple years ago, and several years ago. And it's been an enormous task to just get robots to walk bipedally. I know it's always been the goal. It's like, well, C-3PO and so forth, walk around and so on. But getting robots to walk upright and do simple tasks is an enormous challenge. In the past, they had to have giant computers with like a hose of like cables hooked to them. They couldn't even, if the computers were too big to strap to the actual robot themselves. So this is robots at the DARPA challenge trying to walk mostly bipedally and navigating an environment without an inherent understanding of things like balance and touch and motor control and so forth. And let's watch. With like Benny Hill music. My favorite. A gratuitous balance failure. All right. So you can see the importance of understanding these senses. If you want ambulatory robots that can walk around on bipedally, you're going to need to understand these systems. Okay? So a lot of work has gone into just understanding mechanoreception robots. Just touch and pressure. That's what mechanoreception means. Getting them to the ability where they can sense the world, not from cheating, not from visual sorts of things, because you saw that's only going to get you so far. And feeling, using touch sensors to understand the world for touch and pressure and proprioception, and even things like a vestibular sense and so on. To sense things, there have been enormous work on measurements of like friction and vibration, because then you can get a robotic touch sensor like a hand or something with its kind of like sensor that could simulate what we feel when we feel vibration or roughness or texture, or the friction of something, the force of how hard it presses into. And that's going to be an important aspect of getting them to interact with the real world in a meaningful way. And of course, the knowledge of the robot's own movements. This is something we simply cannot do without. When it gets impaired, sometimes from various conditions like inner ear conditions, or if you've just had too many at the bar, that interferes with proprioception, then you can begin to see how this can turn against you. But if you don't have any system like that whatsoever, it's obviously very problematic. All right, why is this? Quickly, it's because what we touch gets mapped to the somatosensory cortex, and right here, and it works corresponding with the motor cortex and the parietal lobe, which processes spatial information. we need touch to navigate our sense of space, but also our motor response to it. They're constantly working together. And if you lose any of these parts of this chain, then you simply cannot function in the world. You will have difficulty walking, you will have difficulty getting around, and so forth. And you can see that even by things like location in the brain. So we're going to have to work a system that will be able to do this with machines as well. Okay? So all this maps topographically. That means you can trace out a little human on the somatosensory cortex. And it's distorted, but it's a little person written right there on your brain. Okay? And then you can see the close association of the motor cortex and the parietal lobe. All right. So how can computers help us? Well, what about a prosthetic arm? We've been a big theme about this has been like, what about restoring sensation? Watch.
Most of us take a handshake like this for granted, but not former Army Sergeant Garrett Anderson from Champaign, Illinois, who lost his right hand back in 2005. While serving in Iraq and out on patrol, Sergeant Anderson was hit by a roadside bomb.
The shrapnel came up through the vehicle, it severed my arm, and broke my jaw in 7 spots, and I have a mild traumatic brain injury.
Today, he uses this, a fully robotic prosthetic. Bionic limbs like these work by receiving signals from the user's own muscles.
Super light, super strong.
Adil Akhtar is the creator of the Ability Hand and CEO of Psionic, a small startup outside of Chicago.
It's actually detecting all the different positions I'm making with my finger.
The latest model, armed with human-like movement, quick reflexes, and engineered strong enough to withstand even an arm wrestling match.
It takes a lot of strength to withstand the forces of arm wrestling, and so we designed the Ability Hand to be that strong.
But what makes the Ability Hand different is it provides touch feedback to the wearer.
We have touch sensors that relay that information back to your brain through a vibration motor so that when you actually touch an object, you can feel it.
Users are now able to feel the difference between holding something gently and crushing it. A distinction Sergeant Anderson appreciates deeply, now finally able safely to hold his daughter's hand.
It was kind of surreal, that sensory feedback of her touching my hand and feeling the vibration through the prosthetic. It was kind of neat because obviously I can never feel that.
Today, bionic limbs like these are in their infancy, limited to just simple vibrations. But more complex sensations like temperature and even texture are on the horizon, researched by scientists across the country.
What we need to do next is convey the information that the sensors record back to the user in a natural and intuitive way.
Dr. Levi Hargrove, scientific chair at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in downtown Chicago, says in the future, implanted devices will be able to stimulate the nerves directly, harnessing the power of artificial intelligence to more fully merge man and machine.
The field of AI is just accelerating so quickly. You hear of self-driving cars, industrial control robots. They all use these algorithms. The importance of AI is going to be absolutely critical to unlock the potential of these limbs.
So you can see this in a nutshell, even with your little device. At various points I've pulled out my phone. And if your phone gives a little click when you do things, that's a haptic sort of response. Some of you probably have a laptop with a trackpad. If you have, this really works especially well with the Mac one. And you press on it and it feels like it's clicking, you know, like an old kind of thing. There's no click there. There's no function to that. You press hard on it, it's a solid piece. And if you ever don't believe me, just turn off your Mac at some point, your MacBook, and it will no longer function. It's just a solid piece of metal. That click, that feedback is entirely technological, right? It is a click done by this little haptic engine that you have in modern phones and devices and so forth that simulates a press of a button. And so you're seeing a little bit of that, what we can get through the prosthesis, even in our devices, but it can be so much more, right? You can have so much more sophistication in these sorts of things. There's robotic touch. For time reasons, I'll skip this video, but this is essentially a robotic sort of arm, and it offers, you can use this in a kind of sort of semi-virtual environment, so you could do remote surgery. You can put things inside the body that have more degrees of freedom, more ability to move around than human fingers, and so forth and so on. So you could do something like that. We'll skip that one. And pain control. We've talked about VR in mostly kind of entertainment senses, or an AR more in kind of like informational senses. But look at this. The thing about pain, pain is a difficult sense. Pain has certainly physiological aspects of it, but it's also emotional and cognitive. So if you think you feel less pain, you feel less pain, right? It's not something like where if you have cancer...
The Orange County Public Library will be closing in 20 minutes.
Okay,
Please
I'll speed
begin
up.
bringing anything you'd like to check out to the ground floor. Thank you.
If you feel less pain, you feel less pain. Watch, believe me.
Science Central.
I was on fire. I couldn't speak to unplug my seatbelt or open the door. I believe my guardian angel just took me out of the truck.
First Lieutenant Samuel Brown survived an attack on his Humvee in southern Afghanistan, but he would then have to endure rounds of surgery, skin grafts, and painful skin stretching.
This is a battle. It's going to take years to get back to being how it was prior to this.
But while Brown's body fights that battle, virtual reality technology lets his brain enjoy early snowballs to the music of Paul Simon. University of Washington researchers Hunter Hoffman and David Patterson designed a virtual reality game Snow World to occupy burn patients' minds during painful wound cleaning or physical therapy.
Snow World is the opposite of fire. Snowy, cold. It's supposed to cancel out and help distract them from remembering their original injury.
Their previous research showed that not only do patients report less pain in Snow World, MRI scans show it reduces the brain's pain signals. Brown's doctors see real improvement.
What we saw was marked improvement in the range of motion that we were able to achieve, and most importantly, an increased level of comfort.
As published in the journal Cybertherapy and Rehabilitation, the soldiers even report a fun quotient.
I spent some time growing up out in Colorado skiing during the winters and stuff, so, if anything, it, sort of brings back some of those memories.
A cool escape for a war hero putting the pieces back together. We're at close-up of Science Central News.
So pretty cool. I mean, as I was saying, pain is a funny sense. And if you improve the emotional content of the person having pain and you distract them, that's two of the goals of pain maintenance. To get them thinking away from the pain and to get them to thinking about pleasant things, it can control an enormous amount of pain. All right, what about other senses? Well, too many to list here. There's some that we can detect. I didn't even talk about chemodetection, like taste and smell and so forth. But there are plenty of things that we can't sense. We can't sense radio waves or other electromagnetic waves except in the visible spectrum. Radiation, magnetic fields, these are all things that computers could conceivably detect and be used to perceive things that we cannot. All right, so where do we go from here? I think it's obvious to everyone. You don't have to have just watched a thing on AI to realize that this is coming, right? This is not going away. It's only going to be kind of a bigger and bigger portion of our lives as we live longer. We want to be optimistic. We're going to work with AI to improve both its senses and ours. Right? So you can see that there's always this sort of feedback. What we learn can teach us more about that, and what we learn from them can help us as well. And that's what we want to. That's the positive space I think we want to be in as we think about this. So what else? What are the implications of this? Of course, one of our longest goals is the truly fluent conversation between machines and humans. This has always been the goal of human-robot interactions, right? Remember that machines that can understand what we really want can do things like code computers. They could do complex things. They can translate languages. They can create art. They can do anything as long as they can understand us. That's been the key aspect of it, to understand it. So it opens up a whole bunch of possible things. Now, we're already here. The ability to generate very high quality text, images, audio, and visual content. This is only going to become more profound. There will come a time when perhaps only another AI can tell an AI generated something. You can see that that has difficult implications for us, right? If you have someone that appears to be saying something, that's, unpopular or whatever, and an AI has AI has to be run to say that's a fraudulent film, that's fake. Then we already live in a time where these sorts of things are devalued. It's like fake news and so forth. We've got to be aware of the implications of our increasing ability to just generate pictures, video, audio, and so forth out of thin air. It's only going to get more profound. Robots, obviously, that can complete tasks in the real world. The goal of everything we've talked about tonight has been robots that don't just exist in a synthesized space or a representational space, but are out in the real world doing real things, interacting with humans. And of course, the goal, and we're way off from this, don't let ChatGPT confuse you, are robots that can think like we can, or maybe better than we can think, right? And then that's always the frightening implication of all AI. But the possibility is very present that eventually AI will surpass us in many of these qualities, right? Localized AI doing specific tasks has already done that for various things. General AI that is, kind of a global sort of thought process and so forth, that we will have to see. But the implications are there. So if you're thinking about dark implications, what happens when humans become obsolete, right? When we are more valued for things like our emotions and our artistic ability and so forth than our ability to process information, which computers can do far better than us, right, in the future. All right, that's it. Thank you for coming to my little talk. Are there questions or things that you want to discuss? Yes.
So, on the dark implications, I'm actually not worried about
Mm-hmm.
creative thought. I'm more concerned about robots and artificial intelligence change on humanity.
Mm-hmm.